Hello, I'm Kaiser, and welcome to Moose Reads. Before I get started, I want to say that the opinions that I give here are my own opinions. They are extremely subjective. If I dislike a book, it is not a reflection on the author, and it is not a reflection on people who do like it. Different people have different tastes, and that's okay. Today, I will be reviewing Caliban Cove by S.D. Perry. This is the second book in the Resident Evil series. It is a sci-fi horror, the description says. In the aftermath of their ordeal through the Umbrella Corporation's genetic research facility, the surviving members of the Special Tactics and Rescue Squad, STARS, attempt to warn the world about the conspiracy to create terrifying biological weapons. But the conspiracy is far from dead, as the STARS learn when they are declared outlaws by the very people who trained them. Forced to go underground, the STARS resolve to battle the conspiracy on their own, determined to seek out and stop Umbrella's experiments wherever they may be. Combat medic and biochemist Rebecca Chambers, the sole survivor of Bravo Team, joins a new STARS strike force when rumor comes of another Umbrella experiment. Hidden beneath the rocky cliffs of Caliban Cove, Maine, someone is building an army of the undead. Within a sinister lighthouse, through a complex maze of sea caves, inside the shell of a sunken shipwreck, the STARS must battle more unspeakable horrors and stop a madman from unleashing the biohazard upon the world. But the STARS may never get the chance, as the aggressive DNA-altering virus Umbrella has engineered to create its living weapons begins to infect them. 3 stars. This is the first of 2 books in this series that are not based on any of the games. It was written between the release of the first and second games, and I honestly have no idea what Perry's intent was. My best guess is that there wasn't any expectation of a sequel after the first game, so she was making plans to write an entire series on her own, with the first game acting as a springboard. Unfortunately, a sequel was on the way, and if that was her plan, it certainly wasn't long-lived. Still, Caliban Cove isn't a bad entry into the series. Honestly, aside from the second appearance of Perry's OC, Mr. Trent, I'm pretty sure it could fairly easily fit into the wider canon of the Resident Evil universe. The only character it really moves around is Rebecca, and she doesn't seem to appear in any other games until the creation of the prequel game Resident Evil 0, which causes its own host of continuity issues. Given that this is an original story rather than a game adaptation, it doesn't suffer from the issue in the first book where I don't think anyone who hasn't played the games will really get the full effect. Mostly, I thought it was pretty good. It did, however, run into a few problems. First, Perry is trying to emulate the basic setup of Resident Evil, a zombie-infested location with puzzles that must be solved in order to proceed. But I don't think her puzzle skills are quite up to the challenge. They're fine, but rather than unlocking doors or anything of that nature, they're a sort of passcode that will reveal a packet of information on Umbrella's criminal activities in Caliban Cove. The puzzles don't seem especially better or worse than those one might find in the games, but Perry kind of shoots herself in the foot by more or less handing the characters the answers from the start. This is, of course, where Mr. Trent comes in. Once again, he's giving out vague information to help the team get what they need without anything concrete. Only, now we know he's got some pretty high authority on Umbrella, so his motives are completely baffling. Surely he could just bring them down himself. But instead, he gives a list of names that barely matter and a set of clues to solving the requisite puzzles to the team and sends them on their way. He still annoys me, but this is the one and only instance in the series where I feel like his method of delivery and who he decides to give information to make reasonable sense. David, a higher-up in another division of STARS, is an old friend of Barry's and has been following up on the Raccoon team's reports. He gives pretty solid indicators that he's on their side, he's a steady team leader, and he has at least some resources available to him. Trent shows up at his house one day, delivers his info packet, and vanishes back into the rain. David recruits Rebecca to join his small team of original characters because Perry had to tie it to the previous characters somehow, and Rebecca is a biochemist, so she can tell them things about the virus that might be necessary. Does she? No, not really, but it was a reasonable idea. There are 3 other people on the team, John, Karen, and Steve, all members of David's team in STARS, but all willing to defect because it's the right thing. That gives us a total of 5 people to work with, which I don't think is enough for a horror novel of this sort to get away with. It's my general opinion that if your story relies on the tension of whether or not the characters will survive, you need enough people to sacrifice a few to up the threat level, but not so few that there's no one left that can be killed for them to achieve their goal. From the beginning, it's a pretty safe bet that no matter what, Rebecca will make it out alive, which leaves 4 people to establish the threat. You could argue that the threat is already established, I suppose. We've read the first book, we've seen the bioweapons kill like 5 people, and it's the same shit here, only theoretically more dangerous. Besides which, the T-virus infected everybody at the Spencer Mansion facility, and before long we find that nearly all of the scientists at the Caliban Cove facility have also been killed, though they were straight up murdered rather than infected. I just don't think the Umbrella employees count. First, because in both cases they're dead before the story starts, which means we never get any opportunity to see them as actual people rather than corpses. Second, I feel like if you're working with a highly infectious virus in order to create monsters, the death isn't a scary threat, it's the natural consequences of your actions. Your mileage may vary on this one, but for my money, the threat doesn't feel quite as threatening until it claims the life of an innocent or someone we, the reader, have reason to care about. With that criteria, we've got 4 characters to work with, which means there's just not a lot of room to establish and maintain the threat. I also generally take issue with the monsters in this one. As I said, Perry has killed very nearly all the scientists from the start without making them zombies, so what does that leave us with? Well, something like 12 super zombies. Super in that they can shoot guns. And some kind of monkey thing that isn't well described and hardly makes an impact. That's it. Otherwise, we have only the looming threat of live T-virus samples and the big bad to menace the team. It's not great. It gets worse when we learn that the super zombies have one very stupid weakness, which the team will exploit. I think I'm running a little into spoilers, so I guess it's time for the warning. If you don't like spoilers, now is the time to pause or close the video. For everyone else, let's talk details. When I say the threat doesn't feel all that threatening in this book, I mean that nobody dies until pretty much the very end. Before that, the closest we get is Karen taking a hit from the stupid stick and getting infected. There's some chatter about maybe finding a cure, but you can mostly guess she's not going to make it from the moment you realize what's happened. If you're like me, that will be long before the characters realize it. I'm pretty sure every one of these books has someone get slapped with the stupid stick, by the way. In Perry's defense, though, the stupid stick in The Umbrella Chronicles is a relic of the game, which they thankfully fixed in the remake. And a few of the others also may not have been Perry's fault. This one, though, it's 100% Perry. At some point, the gang splits up, with Karen and John going to one building while the other 3 go to another. Before they do that, however, Rebecca warns them that there may still be live T-virus on the island and that they should absolutely not touch anything that may be infected. Karen and John then find the place where they made the super zombies, which clearly involved a fair amount of torture. There's a gurney with straps to hold the unfortunate victim down, and it's got blood on it. Horrified, Karen runs her fingers over the blood. I don't know about you, but that's a thing I feel like I wouldn't do even if I hadn't been told it might kill me less than 10 minutes before. But Karen does it, and then rubs her eyes, and then keeps rubbing her eyes because they're irritated. It also takes longer than I think it should for them to realize. I mean, I'm not a Special Tactics and Rescue Squad member, but if there was a potentially worse and deadly virus where I was, I would worry that any minor discomfort was a sign of impending doom. But she spends a while rubbing at her eyes before anyone thinks to suggest there might be a problem, and then it still takes her a minute to remember how stupid she was. That's not really the only stupid stick moment in this book, by the way. Later, they run into one of the few scientists not added to the corpse pile who claims to be running from the bad guy, though he names the other not-quite-dead scientist rather than the actual bad guy who the team are fairly sure is the problem by that point. He's acting pretty weird, but they more or less take him at his word anyway. The guy wants to go down a tunnel to a boat so they can escape, but tells them the lab they're looking for is down a different tunnel. so David makes the executive decision to send Steve and Karen with him, while the rest go to the lab. Karen is doing extremely poorly by this point, so he basically just sent poor Steve with 2 potential enemies all by himself. He also unknowingly sent him to the lab where the bad guy is waiting to ambush him. The Mad Doctor has created a strain of the T-virus that can make obedient zombies, so that's what the 2 other scientists are, and once he gets a hold of Steve, he gets to be one too. So now we're 2 down with very little book to go. Eventually we shoot John too, but it's a fake out, so we both get the extra death, much too late for it to matter, and keep 3 characters alive. Honestly, while I thought this book was okay for the most part, the ending felt pretty sloppy. There is one other thing about this book that I want to mention. Like I said, the Mad Doctor has made his co-workers into docile zombies, and there's a scene early on in the book where he goes to meet them in a conference room and considers giving them a simple puzzle to solve so he can gauge their cognitive ability. When I was reading this scene, I had an odd sense of déjà vu. It's certainly not a one-for-one, but there's a scene in, I think, the 3rd Resident Evil movie, where they're trying to make the zombies both more docile and more intelligent, and they're in a kind of conference room. It's a glass box with a table, and they give the zombie a simple puzzle to test his cognitive ability. In the movie, of course, the zombie can't solve the puzzle and goes into a rage, killing the 2 nameless scientists who accompanied the movie's villain. I mean, I'm not saying the movie people were copying their homework, but it did feel somewhat similar to me. Has anyone else read this and watched that and had the same feeling? That's all I have to say about Caliban Cove. If you like this video, I hope you'll watch more in the future. Thanks for watching this one. Bye.